and good morning, everybody. I hope you all are safe and well. As Cheryl said, this is a session we're putting on today to give you a special edition COVID-19 fraud awareness update. Given the amount of fraudulent activity over the last few weeks, we wanted to keep you updated with what we're seeing to help ensure that your business can keep protected from these risks going forward. As Cheryl mentioned, my name's Donna Dimmock. I'm also joined by my colleagues Nina Shuckler and Vin Panda today to deliver this fraud awareness session. Now, there's a lot that we're going to cover throughout the session today at a fairly high level, but if there are any areas that you'd like more information or more support on, we will direct you to some additional resources for that additional support towards the end of the call. So as mentioned, the key reason why we're putting on this session is because of the amount of activity that we've seen over the last few weeks. It's very understandable how challenging it's been, and businesses are pretty much trying to survive given all these challenges, having to work in different ways, change at a rapid pace. And fraudsters are capitalising on that. We've seen fraudsters capitalise on the fact that businesses are having to focus their efforts more on being able to work effectively in the current climate. So this session today is really to help remind us all that it's just as important that we need to make sure that we're working safely. Now, we'll structure the call today based on the fraud prevention framework that we recommend, which incorporates 3 core elements, one being technology, which I'll cover, the other being processes and people. And we'll share with you the things that we've been seeing over the last few weeks to help you reflect upon and protect your business going forward. So starting off with technology. Now, let's not forget how much of a positive enabler technology has been. If it wasn't for technology, if we would have faced the challenges that we've seen over the last few weeks, 10 or 20 years ago, many businesses wouldn't have been able to survive. We wouldn't be able to deliver this communication to you today if it wasn't for technology. But the landscape has changed, so we need to make sure that how we're utilising technology in a different way, as I mentioned earlier, that we're doing so safely. And that doesn't have to be complicated. It's just going back to making sure that we're managing the basics well in this current climate. So a key core of our fraud prevention framework when it comes to technology is our antivirus software. Is your antivirus software covering all your staff and devices under the way that you're operating today? Are your updates still being installed as soon as they're available? Is the person who's responsible for that still working and being able to manage those? Are we ensuring that our backups that we need to do on a regular basis are continuing to be done today? And think about, when it comes to things like updates and backups, can we utilise technology in a positive way to automate some of those things? But make sure that those basics are still being carried out and keeping you protected in the way that we're working. Many businesses have had to bulk buy new devices and send them out to staff and colleagues to enable them to work from home. Again, think about, does that antivirus software cover all those new devices? Have staff had adequate training to use these new technology safely? And we have had instances of people having new technology, not being that familiar or that comfortable in utilising them, and then referring to personal devices to do work activities. How can you ensure that you're identifying when people are doing that within your business and not opening up additional vulnerabilities to your fraud prevention framework when it comes to technology? So review your risk in the current climate and just make sure that we're managing our technology basics well. So I mentioned already that we've seen a huge increase in staff working from home, again, understandably with the current conditions. But think about, how are your staff accessing your network? Are they doing so securely? Are they using a VPN, for example? You just need to make sure when they're accessing your business network that they're doing so in a safe and secure way. Staff are maybe carrying out tasks that they hadn't done previously, maybe Other staff are having to isolate, they're not very well, so others are having to pick up new responsibilities. Have they had that training to make sure that they're doing those new tasks in a safe way? Now, there are some great resources that have become available recently to help ensure that our staff are remote working in a safe way. And I've made reference to two key bits of resources that you can see on screen there from the Global Cyber Alliance and National Cyber Security Centre. Some great tools when it comes to giving your staff advice to work from home in a safe way. And going back to staff doing new tasks, they will be receiving emails that they've maybe not received before, that they may not be familiar with. So it's not a surprise that over the last few weeks we've seen a huge increase in COVID-19 phishing-related scams, because fraudsters will dominate any vulnerability or opportunity for people to fall for this scam, and wanting people to click on links or attachments to download malicious software and infect your business. So it's a crucial time at the moment to remind staff of the threat of phishing so that they don't fall victim to the phishing scams that we've seen over the last few weeks. Another area that I just wanted to share with you today is around ransomware, because again, this is a threat that we've seen hugely increase over the last few weeks. Now, ransomware, for those who aren't familiar, is a type of attack that would encrypt all your data, and the fraudster will demand a ransom before they release that data out to you. And I'm sure many of you will have a ransomware strategy already in place today. But does that strategy work under the way you're currently operating? Think about that strategy, think about those 3 points that are on screen, and make sure that in the way that you're working today, that strategy will work effectively. Are all your staff aware of ransomware? So if they're working from home, isolated from other colleagues, and they see a ransomware message on screen, do they know that they need to pull the plug straight away, disconnect from the network immediately to help prevent any further spread of that ransomware infection? Is your strategy for ransomware in a drawer or cupboard in the office? Because it's effective to not have your ransomware strategy on the system in case all your data is encrypted. But if we're not able to access that strategy, do we need printouts of those at home today? So again, just think about your ransomware strategy, your risks when it comes to technology, and how are we managing those today? And just make sure that we're managing those basics well under the current circumstances. So Nina, what do we need to think about when it comes to controls and processes?
Thanks, Donna. The importance of having clear and accessible processes are even more important during this difficult time, especially now when staff are working remotely. So today I want to cover 3 key things in this session. Firstly, it's around understanding the current threats, particularly around fraud. Now, the attacks remain the same, but fraudsters will exploit that heightened risk, fear and uncertainty in deploying their scams. As Don has mentioned, they will use this vulnerability presented by COVID-19 together with our new working practices. So I'm going to talk through the current frauds that we've seen in recent weeks in a few moments. But my second point is around using our understanding of these threats to create clear and pragmatic processes to support your workforce. And thirdly, I want to talk about planning for the worst case scenario, the importance of everyone understanding what to do if you do become a victim of fraud or suffer a cyber attack. So let's start by looking at what we're seeing in respect of fraud. Donna has already spoken about the risks around phishing emails, and email continues to be the most popular tool for fraudsters. Do your staff know that emails aren't a secure method of communication and that they can be tampered with? This is especially important to highlight now when more of us are working remotely, and email is the most likely method of how we communicate with each other. To that end, fraudsters are exploiting this vulnerability by impersonating trusted individuals or trusted organisations through email. And we've seen an upward trend in CEO fraud. This is where fraudsters are either hacking or spoofing a staff member's email account. And as the name suggests, it's often the CEO's email, or in fact it may be the business owner's or the FD's email account which is hacked. And using this compromised account, the fraudster will send an email request for an urgent payment to be made. And with staff working from home, they're not going to have the option to walk up to a colleague to verify a payment request, or they may not have access to all the usual systems at home. So consider what processes you need to put in place to ensure that they know how to verify payment requests when working remotely. Invoice fraud continues to be prevalent. This is where fraudsters will pretend to be either a supplier or a contractor emailing you to change their bank details. Now, the good news is that confirmation of payee, which is a new banking industry service, is now in place. This is to help you ensure that the payments you're making are secure. It tells you whether the account number you're making a payment to matches the beneficiary name that you've entered. Now, we're already seeing businesses avoid becoming a victim to fraud using this initiative, but the system only works if your staff know how to properly investigate any mismatches, and they do this using alternative communication method to verify those details, and not by replying to the email or phoning a number that's contained within that email, asking why the name and the number don't match. This is because fraudsters will provide plausible explanations for any discrepancies. And again, we've seen a few frauds in recent weeks where this has happened. So it's really important that all staff are aware of this. And it's also vital that staff are aware that confirmation of payee is for single payments only, and that not all banks are up and running with this yet. So although it's an extra reassurance, it's important that you don't solely rely on it and that your staff continue to verify account details using alternative communication channels. So let's think about how you can strengthen your processes and controls. It's important to make your processes really easy to access and keep them simple. Consider setting up how-to guides and make sure that they are clearly signposted and easy to access. And looking at the verification processes, your finance teams are going to be under a lot of pressure. So what additional controls can you implement in order to support them? Are you able to implement a password system or use SMS text exchange as a means of verification? Now, these are very simple extra checks, but they'll go a long way in dealing with the prevalence of these types of frauds. It's important to have clearly defined communication channels. And in the same vein, it's also essential for staff to know what the fallback position is if they are unable to verify those details. Do they have the confidence in refusing to make a payment if they're unable to authenticate it, whether that instruction is from their boss or an external stakeholder? And in creating these enhanced processes, it's important to talk to your service providers, your supply chain, and your stakeholders as well. They're all under the same pressures with the same resource disruptions and including managing key personnel absences. So it's worth taking the time out to find out what their contingencies are and having a unified approach to fraud risk. In the same way, identify your own key staff. Who are your deputies? Do they understand their responsibilities? By raising awareness of the current scams, they will understand that they can't take shortcuts and appreciate that emails aren't a secure method of communication. And whilst you establish strong controls for making payments, etc., it's also important to have processes in place in case you do become a victim of fraud or cyber attack. How you deal with that event could determine on how you weather that storm. So fast action could minimise the impacts of a fraud incident. So who should they contact and what action needs to be taken? Think about those reporting channels and how your staff will access those numbers, especially in the event of a ransomware attack, when they won't be able to access the contact details online. Are you able to load key numbers on mobiles or get them to print them out and keep them to hand? And in the case of fraud, contacting the bank should be a priority, as quick action could result in recovery of those stolen funds, followed by contacting the police and your insurance provider. Now, if you are a regulated business, think about who would need to reach out to them. And we've seen a number of cases recently where companies' governance ratings have been reduced as a result of fraud, and actually as how they've acted on that fraud and the actions they've taken as a result of fraud. So consider the impacts of that. And then you'll have to also need to have a process around the investigation. Who would lead that? How would you treat the individuals that allowed that fraud to take place? Would you be going down the disciplinary route or the supportive one? In fact, how much time did you invest in educating your staff on the current fraud threats so they could spot these scams? I'm going to now pass you over to Vin, who will discuss increasing staff awareness in more detail in her session. Vin?
Thanks, Nina. That's been really helpful. And I'm going to move on now to looking at our people. So are our people our organisation's biggest defence? Because at a time like this, we really need them to be. We can be the biggest defenders of helping stop a case of fraud from occurring within our organisation. We can all take responsibility for doing the basics around good cyber security. And one of the key things around that is having good password management. It's essential. So if you think about if an attacker discovers or guesses a password for one of your users, they're easily able to impersonate a user or access sensitive or confidential data on a device. So at a time like this, when we're relying mostly on electronic communication, how would you know if one of your staff's passwords had been compromised and that they were being impersonated? The National Cyber Security Centre recommends that we use 3 random words to create a strong and robust passphrase, and we don't reuse that password across personal and work profiles. One of the other things that we can do is think about multi-factor authentication. So that's where you require an additional factor as well as your password, and that's usually something that you and only you can access. So that could be a code that's sent to you by text message, or it could be a code that's created by an app. So even if an attacker discovers a password, they won't be able to access the associated account without also compromising that factor. Something also to think about whilst you're working remotely is if you need to share sensitive data across work files, how are you ensuring that that's encrypted to minimise any risk of any data breaches? We've still got to have the same sorts of processes even though we're now working remotely. So think about how you share that. It might be that you encrypt the data, it might be that you use password protection for that. Either way, ensure that your staff aren't taking any shortcuts. Whilst we all work from home, we're reliant upon technology. As Donna says, it's a key enabler for us being able to communicate. However, you've got to remind all of your staff that the fraudsters can hack into emails, they can spoof telephone numbers or email addresses. So it's essential that if you're being asked to click on a link or respond to a payment instruction or perhaps even change account details, all of your staff always ask themselves, is this person really who they say they are? If something's being flagged as urgent, that they don't take any shortcuts. They always stick to the processes of authenticating using an alternative method of communication. Fraudsters prey on uncertainty, and given the current climate, it presents them with a massive opportunity as we all work differently. So it's really essential that we don't get caught off guard. Last week, Action Fraud have revealed that they've received a number of reports and they've been gathering lots of data on those reports, and we're seeing that already total losses at the start of this week have been reported to be around 1.7 million. Now on screen you can see an example of a government branded phishing email, and on this phishing email what they're doing is promising you a tax refund because of COVID-19. And they're asking users to click on a link, which then takes you to another screen where you're asked to input sensitive personal information. So at an uncertain time like this, more people are likely to be caught out by scams like this because we're all on high alert for anything that comes through related to COVID-19. So it's essential really that as a business, you have a mechanism that allows your staff to report any phishing scams that they've received. It might be that you've already got a facility to do this automatically. or it might be something that you can easily add in if you're using Outlook. There's a report a phishing email function within Outlook. It might be for some smaller businesses that you might need a more manual process of reporting to a dedicated inbox, perhaps. Either way, it's important that you remind all of your staff at this uncertain time to report phishing emails so that ultimately something can be done about them. Also important to consider that if you have already clicked on a link and then you realise that it was fraudulent, it's still not too late. You can take steps to limit any damage. You can run a full antivirus scan and you can follow any instructions, or you can consider contacting your IT team or your key contact within the IT team and follow their instructions. If you did click on a link and you were directed to a site where you've then been instructed to enter a password, or you've given away some memorable information or confidential details, then it's really important that you go back and you change any passwords that might be associated with that. You want to create a culture within your organisation of reporting and not one of penalising staff if they've clicked on a link within a phishing email. Now, over the last few weeks, we've also seen a high number of smishing cases being reported. So that's the same as phishing, but just penetrated using text messages. And in the same way, we've seen text messages where the name has appeared to be spoofed as the government. And in some of those smishing scams, we've had the fraudsters telling you that you've been fined because you've left the house too many times, or that you can click on a link and you can claim a coronavirus-related goodwill payment. Ultimately, it's only us, humans, individuals, that can defend against these sorts of scams. And you can only do that if you know what to look out for. You've got to be aware of never clicking on unverified links or going on to provide personal or confidential details. Now, as Nina says, we've got to plan for the worst. So we've got to have a contingency plan. And for many organisations, you might have already invoked your contingency plan given the current circumstances. But you've got to think about, have you got enough users enabled, perhaps for your online banking system? If someone was to suddenly be taken off ill, have you got enough deputies? And do they understand their responsibilities about using the online banking systems? Do they know their responsibilities around checking payment details and how to authenticate those details? Now, we appreciate for many businesses right now, fraud and cyber risks might have moved down on your list of priorities because you're trying to firefight. But you've got to remember it's at uncertain times like this that fraudsters really strive. So it's essential that you provide all of your staff with reminders and ongoing support on fraud awareness and protection. We've got a number of resources that are available to you, which I'll signpost to shortly. You should be confident that you know how you or your staff would respond to a fraud or cyber attack whilst you're working remotely. Essentially, as Nina says, raise the alarm as soon as you realise something is wrong. But to do that, you've got to have quick access to the right numbers. And where are those numbers right now? Are they written down on a notepad, or are they saved within your device on your computer? And if that gets taken down, how will you access them? We've also got to bear in mind that whilst we're all working from home on a long-term basis, it does place an increased trust on our colleagues. And unfortunately, for some organisations, it will mean that there might be a sudden uptick in internal fraud, so fraud committed by your colleagues. And that's because, of course, we've got the absence of normal office etiquette and discipline, so it gives them that extra opportunity. So you've got to really ensure that you've got continued engagement with your team members and that any existing monitoring or oversight arrangements stay in place and aren't compromised. You've got to remind all of your staff, and especially those using the banking system, that the bank would never ask you, whether it's on an email or on a phone call, to reveal things like your full passwords, your memorable information, or your card and reader authentication codes. So you've heard from all three of us this morning, and we've kind of broken down the session into those three sections because we strongly recommend that you think about all three of those factors, so your technology, your people and your processes when it comes to having an effective fraud prevention strategy. So to recap, Donna talked about technology, which, as she said, is a key enabler right now, and without it, we wouldn't be able to work effectively. But we've still got to ensure that we're supporting our staff with things like antivirus, backups, which are all essential things around defending ourselves against fraud and cyber attacks. Nina talked about processes, which no doubt will have changed given the current circumstances, but you've got to make sure that you've communicated those really well to your staff. Ensure they know how to authenticate payment requests with others in the business or externally. Nina mentioned confirmation of payee and how fraudsters are getting around it just by using emails. So you've got to ensure that your staff always authenticate using a different method of communication and be aware that emails can be hacked, and whether that's internally or whether it's an email from your supplier or someone external, it could have been compromised. In my session around people, one of the key things there is continuing to provide fraud education and awareness whilst your employees are working remotely. Fraudsters are taking advantage of these uncertain times, so it's our responsibility as business leaders to support our staff with up-to-date guidance so they know what to look out for. Set the right culture within your business. You want your employees to report things like phishing emails or any other scams that they see, or even any suspicions that something isn't quite right. Also, really encourage them to adhere to any additional or new processes that you've had to put in place and not take shortcuts or feel pressured into rushing things like payment instructions. As I mentioned, we've got lots of resources that are available for you to support you during this process. We've got dedicated fraud pages on our websites, on the Lloyds Bank or Bank of Scotland pages. We've also got a presence on social media where we share any trends and information about current fraud scams. The National Cybersecurity Centre, as Donna and I mentioned, have recently released a remote working guide that's available on their website. Really great resource for you to tap into to support you in setting up your colleagues to work effectively and safely from home. Now, we've tried to answer as many questions online as we can this morning, but for any that you have posted, we'll try and get back to you as soon as possible following this call. If you have got any further questions, then please do reach out to your relationship managers or your service teams, and we'll try and support you through this process. We've recorded this morning's session, so that recording will be available again through your relationship managers or those service teams. So please do approach them, and you feel free to share this with your colleagues. That's all from us this morning, and I'd like to thank you all for listening in, and please continue to stay safe. Thanks all.
Thank you. Does that conclude your conference call for today?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes your conference call for today. You may now disconnect. Thanks for joining and have a very good day.